It's time for an update on the development of my dungeon crawl board game, Low. I've spent the last couple months refactoring the entire game, moving away from the old counter-based item system to a new card-based item system. There were a lot of things that I loved about the old counter-based system. I loved the way the counters looked. I liked the way they felt. I liked the way that you could plug items into item slots on the hero cards, and you could drop item counters on the map and pick them up later. There were a lot of really cool things about the counters, but a lot of my items have special functionality. So learning the rules for each item was kind of tedious. Players used to have to spend a lot of time in the rule book sifting through pages of rules to figure out how items worked. And during multiplayer games, we were constantly passing the rule book around. So then in the next testing release, I added a bunch of reference cards, and this was my attempt to make it a lot easier to access the rules for all the items. But the problem is there ended up being over a dozen reference cards, double-sided. I found that players were just sifting through all the reference cards to try to find the right reference card, and it really just became like a rule book with a bunch of loose leaf pages. And in some ways it was almost harder to find the information you were looking for on the reference cards, and you still had to pass them around from player to player. This just wasn't really working because of all the special functionality of all the different items. Now these item cards are still just in the prototype stage. I basically just ripped the art straight off the counters, put them on the cards, came up with a really basic design, took the rules from the reference sheets, added them to the cards, and then I did some cleanup on some of the art. Some of the art I haven't touched at all. Some of the rules I've revised, and I've made some of the items a little more nuanced, a little more complicated. I've gotten rid of a couple items, I've added a couple more. But the single coolest thing about the card system is that almost every single one of these reference cards is going away now. They're just not necessary anymore because all the rules are baked directly into the cards. All these counters are going away. The rule book's going to be shorter. This is a completely modular system. So it used to be if the warrior had a great sword, you could stow it, you could equip it, and you would have to know that this is the great sword. It doesn't say anywhere on here that it's the great sword. Now how it kind of works is there's going to be a smaller hero card. It might be a little bigger than this. So the new hero card could end up looking kind of like this. It would be a jumbo card, 3.5 by 5.5 inches. It would have a 12 slot stat tracker on it. This is sort of the minimalist version of that card, which functionally does exactly the same thing. So I'm gonna play test both of these styles to see if I can get away with this or if I should go with something more like that. Now, if the warrior has a great sword, to stow it, you just put it in the hero deck. Every hero is going to have a deck of cards, just things that they have stowed. And to use it, you can see here, you have to equip it in both hands. So you can just place it beside your hero. I'm not going to include dashboards with the core set. Players can decide how they want to organize their cards. I've been using the backs of these map tiles as sort of a style guide for the rest of the cards because I sort of liked how these turned out. So yeah, we have our warrior item cards, cleric item cards, rogue, mage. So we still have our class items, our starting items for each class. The spells are now a deck of cards instead of just a single reference sheet. What I like about having a deck of cards for spells is that A, it's very easy to add more spells. Now the mage can start with a specific number of spells, and some of the mage upgrades allow the mage to start with more spells or collect more spells. So the spell system's a little more interesting now. There's level 1, level 2, and level 3 spells, and that pretty much indicates what the challenge rating of the spell is and what the casting cost of the spell is. So in order to cast a spell, you have to pass a knowledge test at a certain challenge rating, and then you also have to pay the casting cost, whether you successfully cast the spell or not. Here I'm playing with tinted card backs to match like the class. Here I'm playing with like maybe just keep everything gray on the back. all the rare items, so the power items, the dark relics, and the lost artifacts, they're all rare items. So now the quests themselves are built with discovery items. And so these treasure discoveries will be mixed in with objectives and traps. So traps are all now just discovery cards. I can just write more traps and then have the player randomly select traps from the trap deck. So I've been trying to see, just as an experiment, like how many of the rules from each quest in the adventure book and the quest book here can be ported to these discovery cards. And it turns out that a lot of the rules can be ported over to these discovery cards. And then I realized that what I needed was a quest deck for each quest that sort of gets the ball rolling. So whenever you start a quest now, you just pull out the quest cards for that quest. So this is quest A, and this is card A, card B, card C. So quest 1 has 3 double-sided cards, and you always just start with card 1, side A, and the entire flavor text intro to the game is here, and then it just tells you what to do next. Turn this card over, and you turn the card over, and then you have your setup instructions. It tells you exactly which cards you need to pull for the quest, which monsters you need to gather, and then it just says begin play. So there's some interplay between the quest deck and the discovery deck. All the warnings are now cards. Now this is all stuff I have to play test, so I'm not 100% sure how well it's going to work yet. But the idea is that the discovery deck, and maybe this should be called event deck. I'm unclear if this should be a discovery deck or an event deck, but it's kind of basically the same. Every single warning can have individual rules, and I really love this because now there's more nuanced AI. This chanting card says, chanting echoes through the halls. Mark a random adjacent map tile with chanting. You know, this chanting says the chanting ahead grows louder and louder. So now you mark a random unexplored tile exit. So I'm not saying that I've got this perfectly right yet, but this is something that I always kind of envisioned for the game. I always saw it existing somewhere in between, like Runebound 3rd Edition and Legends of Andor. I didn't want all the instructions for the game to be baked into a card deck like in Legends of Andor, although I think that system works really, really well, but I didn't want to go that far with it. But I wanted a little more meat to the quest system than Runebound. So I kind of see this system as a little beefier than the Runebound 3rd Edition quest system was, but not quite as on rails as the Legends of Andor system. We can see with the Rumble discovery, we start with the flavor text. Something powerful shakes the very foundation of this place, loosening the stonework above. And then you mark this area with Rumble. The word area is a term that I've created. I'm getting rid of the phrase map section. So there's map tiles, and then there's map sections. And so if you have a map tile that's got 2 rooms separated by a door, that's 2 separate map sections, even though it's 1 map tile. I'm replacing map section with area. So we mark this area with Rumble. So every turn you go through any warnings that are on the board and you execute the turn behavior. So here, every turn we're gonna roll a d6, and on a 1, we're gonna move Rumble to an adjacent walkable map tile and place debris on a random tile exit of that map tile. So the Rumble's gonna slowly loosen the ceiling, and debris is going to fall and potentially block the way. And then if you fail your dodge, you're going to take damage. You're getting hit by falling debris. But then here it says, when the inner sanctum is placed, read quest card AC, the ritual. So the ritual begins when these 2 conditions are true. The inner sanctum has been placed, and it says map tiles 13 through 16, and Rumble card A15 is in play. When the ritual begins, you discard the Rumble card, and then you spawn the old worm. This basically just tells you how to initiate the ritual. And then there's an instruction here to turn this card over and then read D. And then here's instructions on how to battle the old worm. And it basically just says, the worm is gonna spend 4 turns eating each one of the sacrificials. And then on the 4th turn, the worm's gonna descend back into the wormhole, not to be seen again. And basically during the ritual, you can try to defeat the old worm. There's 2 basic endings to this scenario. You either defeat the old worm, you get some flavor text. The old worm lets out a deafening screech, then goes limp and slowly slides down into the hole from which it emerged. As you make your way out of the temple, you see hysterical cultists shedding their robes and fleeing into the woods. Exhausted, you make your way back to the village to rest, recover, and prepare. And then here it just tells you how to tally up your XP. And then here's like the lose condition. If you're unable to defeat the old worm, you can still make it out alive, but all the cultists are basically gonna pile into the inner sanctum and try to take you out. So you have to fight your way through all the cultists to get out of the temple. And if you do, then you can calculate your XP. That's kind of where I'm at. It turns out that I can get like 90 to 95% of the quest rules out of the book and onto these cards. You've got these overarching quest cards that tell you how to set up a quest and how to initiate the major plot points. And then you have these discovery cards, which can trigger some of these plot points. So the game is not super heavily narrative, but it does provide some narrative framework for a thematically cohesive dungeon dive. So the weird thing is, functionally, it's almost identical to the way it used to work. So in the very first version of this game, all these warnings were just a chit pull. But there was some weird sort of stacking issues and then reshuffle. I mean, it was a mess, really, which is why in the second testing release of the game, I came up with this little program board, and this was my attempt to solve the weird chit stacking issues. And it kind of worked better than the first version, but it still had issues, and there was still some weird stacking and restacking and recycling of chits, and everything is just baked into this discovery deck now and plays off the quest deck. So this all goes away. We could still have the warning counters here, or it could be one of those deals where you're mapping a generic ID counter. You place one B here, and then you place the other B on the map, and now you've linked Rumble to some space on the map. Kind of goes back to the question of, are the monsters going to be counter-based, or are they going to be standee-based? Now, I've gone ahead and finished building all the standees that would come with the game if the game shipped with standees. I posted a survey to see, how many people would like the game to ship with standees and how many people would like the game to ship with counters. And about 100 people responded, and it was split down the middle. Now, there still needs to be some counters that ship with the game. I played around with wooden blocks for stat tracking and decided that I don't really like that. So I'm definitely going to be using counters. So then it's just a matter of, do I use 1/2 inch counters? Do I use the 3/4 inch counters? Do I use a small hero card? Do I use a big hero card or a medium-sized hero card? And if the game ships with counters for monsters, I've got it down to 5 slugs of counters, down from 10. So the last version of the game shipped with 10 slugs. And then I'm keeping these out just to remind myself that I need to finish 3D modeling the minis so that I can make STL files available for anybody that wants to 3D print miniatures for the game. I'm gonna make some minor changes to the map tiles. I think I want to make the lit tiles a little more lit and the unlit tiles a little more unlit. I kind of want the art to let the player know what's lit and what's not lit, instead of like all these little torch icons and stuff. So I think white center dots for lit spaces, black center dots for unlit spaces, and I'm gonna play up the lighting in the art. I need to finish the new monster cards. That's probably the next big project. I can do some playtesting without them, but I really need to get those finished. I need to iterate on all the item cards, and I've figured out that if I limit myself to like 15 minutes per card, I can do 4 an hour. So let's say there's 100 cards, that's 25 hours. That's a reasonable amount of work. I wish I had an hour to spend on each card, but that's 100 hours worth of work. That's a lot. So that's the way I'm thinking about some of these revisions. I'm just sort of allotting a time budget per card. I need to finish up the quest cards and the discovery cards for scenarios 2 and 3, but I want to playtest scenario 1 first to figure out if I even like this system. There's a potion deck now with 2 copies of every potion. And then here we have a deck of ingredient cards. And right now there's like 3 copies of each ingredient. I would love to get the rule book down to 20 pages because as more and more of the rules get baked into the cards themselves, there's a lot less explaining that has to happen in the rule book. The quest book is going to become small, 3.5 by 5.5 jumbo card-sized booklet. So the quest book may actually be this size with like 8 pages per quest. I really love the idea of a quest being able to fit in a box this size, a tiny little 3.5 by 5.5 inch box. You can fit slugs in this box, which means I could pack monsters in. I could pack the rule book in, deck of quest cards and discovery cards for that adventure. I love the idea of quests coming in these tiny little boxes. Really opens up a lot of possibilities. And it's why I keep talking about expansions, even though I haven't shipped the core game, because I want this to kind of be a whole system that's expandable. The old quest book was big, so it kind of implied that any new quests, any expansions would also have to come in a big box. But I love the idea that after this big box, well, this is a small box, but this is a big box for this game. I love the idea that after this ships, that all future expansions for this game are going to come in these tiny little boxes. This game has a village mode. In between each quest, you go to the village, upgrade powers and skills with XP. You can buy equipment with loot that you've acquired. So it gives and you can rest, recover, resupply. So village mode is still going to be there. And I kind of think village mode should come in a small expansion sized booklet too. I think village mode is almost going to be treated sort of like an expansion because I like the idea of being able to add more things to village mode. So village mode needs to be very modular and expandable. The game currently comes with a sandbox mode called Forgotten Places, but it's very underdeveloped. It's never really been tested properly. The way I'm sort of thinking about this is if I can get all 3 quests working and I'm really happy with the game engine itself and the flow of the game and how the quest cards and the discovery cards all interact with each other, then it's gonna be a lot easier to write a sandbox mode. It seems almost counterintuitive. It's like, wouldn't you build the sort of general kind of everything mode before you build very specific quests? And I think it's almost easier to design a bunch of specific quests, see how they all work, and then figure out how to build a more kind of a superset of that, a more randomized version of those specific quests where you can sort of mingle elements of each quest together. And I think that's why I started building a campaign in the first place, because sandbox mode has always just been a little too open-ended, and I love the idea of sandbox mode, but I don't want it to be so generic that it's not thematically cohesive. That's one issue I have with some of the older dungeon crawls that I played, like Citadel of Blood is a good example. You're dealing with hobgoblins in one room, and then you run into a Medusa in the next room, and then a Minotaur. Like, none of it makes any sense. It's totally random. I want to build a sandbox mode that has thematic cohesion, and the only way that I know how to do that is to get actual campaigns working and then sort of abstract out from that where the hooks are to sort of play and shuffle some of those elements around. I have some strong ideas on how to implement sandbox mode in a way that's going to be super cool and random and procedural, but also have thematic story hooks. It's kind of been the holy grail for me, and I haven't really had the chops to like really nail that yet. But I think once I get these quests finished and working, pretty sure that sandbox mode is going to fall into place.